All right, Andy, welcome to College Admissions Toolbox.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. Really excited to share your advice with my audience here. Do you want to share a little bit about how you got into college advising?
Yeah, I think in a way, I don't know too many people in our field who sort of, thought they would do this growing up as a career. It sort of found me. I went to college and law school. I racked up $100,000 worth of debt just for law school alone. I managed to pay off my undergrad debt in between. Then I practiced law for 5 years. Then we got sold and sold again. And after the second time, I thought, you know what, I really want to go out and do something on my own. And this is in like 1999. And I started going around and attending different marketing conferences. And I met a guy who was a college planner. And I started telling him, my story about how I probably could have gotten a ton more financial aid because my dad was self-employed. He was a writer. He was disabled. He had a really low income, but he didn't really value expert advice. So he sort of thought he could figure everything out himself because he happened to be very smart. He went to Yale, but it didn't really work out too well for me. So that was the message that sort of resonated with me to sort of work out a partnership to get into this business in the early 2000s. And then, I started learning more and more about it and became sort of a full circle, holistic college financial aid, college admissions, test prep tutoring, career planning, type of firm.
Well, that's fantastic. I love that you have this special focus on financial aid because I feel like it often gets overlooked. People focus so much on how to get into college and then don't think about how they're going to pay for it. So I'm glad that you're offering that service to your clients. What would you say is one of the most common misconceptions you see families have around financial aid?
Yeah, there's so many. When we were sort of preparing for this, I was thinking like, how am I going to come up with just one? But if I had to pick one, it would be that you shouldn't bother applying because you're not going to qualify. And I hear this from people who make seven-figure incomes, and I hear this from people who make $20,000 to $40,000 incomes. A lot of people think, what's the point? It's because maybe it's too overwhelming. Maybe they've heard from someone else, like a sister-in-law whose cousin got into Penn ED. Now they became experts, because they went through it once themselves and all that. But the fact is that, and this number increases every year, the National Association of Collegiate Business Officers reported that the average discount for private colleges is 52.4% this year, and that's been going up every year that I've been paying attention since the 2010 or so. And that what that indicates is that there's a lot of discounting going on, whether it's need-based aid or whether it's merit-based. There's actually more non-need-based aid out there. So, nobody should overlook money. At any given college, roughly 25% of the families are paying full price, and they're subsidizing the other 75%. So paying full price is it's a choice, not an obligation.
It's kind of funny. It's like going to an old world marketplace. You have to realize that you are expected to bargain and that you should.
Oh yeah, that's a great analogy. Also, if you're on a plane, going cross country, there could be 300 people on the plane and 300 different fares, but you're all going to the same destination. So it just depends on knowing the rules of the game. That's really what it comes down to, is not overpaying needlessly, not sabotaging yourself, not burying your head in the sand. You said something that I witness almost every day, practically, because people spend way too much time on the applications, on trying to make sure they don't blow any application deadlines, and then only at that point they're like, oh yeah, how are we going to pay for this? So it really should be done in concert.
Right. And so when it comes to filling out those financial aid forms, like, where can families turn to? Can colleges help them, or guidance counselors, or CPAs? Like, those are some of the common sources I'm guessing that families often go to.
Yeah, there's the do-it-yourself, and plenty of people, will do that themselves, because if you look on the website, there's all sorts of language, about how they've tried to make it easy for people. And if you look at the main application, the FAFSA free application for federal student aid, it's roughly 100-something questions. It's relatively straightforward on its face, but there are something like 1,100 pages of regulations behind that, and that's the easy form. There's a much harder one called the CSS profile that's 200-something questions. It's about 10 times as hard as the FAFSA. So people can really, it's very easy to mess up for people who are not necessarily do-it-yourselfers. You know, I look at it like, you know, I wouldn't do my own taxes. I have an accountant who charges me a lot of money to do that, just so I don't screw up and make any mistakes. So if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, then the next, you know, like you said, the next sort of logical places to look would be your high school guidance counselor, but they're not trained at all. And they're already overwhelmed enough as it is in general. I think isn't the ratio of a student to counselor like 400 or 500 to 1, depending on where you live.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So they're having a hard, you know, they spend 20% of their time supposedly on college stuff and about 0 on financial aid. So they're not a good choice. CPAs generally are good with numbers. This may seem funny, but we have probably 7 or 8 active CPAs as clients in our practice, because they recognize that they need to stay in their own lane, and they have a hard enough time keeping up with the Department of Treasury, IRS regulations, which are going through a lot of changes, and you know, the Department of Ed with those 1,100 pages of regulations governing the financial aid rules. That's a lot to keep up on. So I'm constantly teaching CPAs. I teach a continuing education class that over the years, where I'm explaining to them stuff that they didn't know about how to value businesses, about what types of assets or savings accounts penalize you more than others, what types of savings accounts are totally exempt. So unfortunately, unless a parent stumbles across an expert, and there are a bunch of us in the country, but there's no like one universal monolithic, you know, resource to be able to go to. You've got to either, you know, spend years learning it yourself or find someone who can help you.
Nice. Well, I really appreciate what you said, which is that even the CPAs realize they need to seek out expert advice, because this is important enough that it's worth getting right.
You know, it's important in a number of ways, because you can make a silly little mistake like transposing a date of birth or a social security number when you do the forms. And that's not a substantive mistake. It's just an administrative mistake. But even that can knock you out of the running for getting money, because you won't discover it until they kick your application back. And then by then the application deadline may have passed. And, you know, losing money is one thing, but having to tell your deserving son or daughter, listen, I know you got in, I know you did your part to get into this school, but unfortunately, I can't swing it because I didn't understand the rules of the game. I didn't do my part. That's really what we're talking about. And that's really unfortunate. That happens probably hundreds of thousands of times a year.
Yeah, we definitely want to avoid that. And speaking of your common mistakes, even forgetting deadlines is a really important one too. What are the typical deadlines for financial aid applications?
Yeah, that's also, you know, I feel like everything I'm saying has like a nuanced answer. I'm not trying to be evasive, but you know, like your taxes, they're due April 15th or whatever each year. In financial aid, there are varying and multitudinous deadlines. So it depends on whenever the school says your deadline is. So if you're applying early decision to University of North Carolina, it's October 15th, which gives you a solid 2 weeks after the forms come out in October 1st. A lot of other early deadlines are November 1 or November 15th. Then there's also a bunch of schools who have later ones like February 1, March 15th. So each school potentially has its own deadline. So just in terms of, to be less overwhelming, in terms of a tip for your listeners, what we do, we meaning my wife who does all the forms, because I don't do any of the real work in our firm. I appear on podcasts. That's
right. The glamorous stuff.
You're right. Yeah, the college podcasts. What we do is just whatever the earliest deadline is, we just throw them all in at the same time, just so we don't have to worry about missing other deadlines. And you know, because it's basically, with few exceptions, 1 or 2 applications that can go into most of the schools on the list. So we just do them all at once.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Just one and done, get it out of the way. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yep.
Nice. I love it. What would you say is one of the biggest mistakes families make in this process? Or is it really about the deadlines or about not treating it with the importance it deserves?
Yeah, I think it's not knowing where to start. I don't know if that's really a mistake, but it's, or just sort of keeping your head in the sand and thinking, okay, it's just going to work out, or just laboring under some sort of misconception. Like I talked about, we're not going to qualify or anything. So if I had to sort of sum it up in a mistake, it's not being an advocate for yourself to see what the resources are to avoid overpaying for college. So some people think, well, we make too much money. They may or may not be true. There happens to be no magic number of income, believe it or not, in the financial aid rules that says, well, once you hit the ceiling, you're done. That doesn't exist, because there's so many other factors. There's 77 factors. So just laboring under the misconception that you shouldn't bother, or financial aid isn't for you, or for people like you, or we have so much saved that, we're going to get penalized because they're going to take all of it, or they're going to take our house, all these types of things. It all comes down to separating, myth from fact, and just assuming that you know how it all works, even though you haven't really done your due diligence.
Right. So do the research and actually just get started with the process. So what is the first thing that you would suggest a family does to get started with the financial aid process?
Well, there's really a number of things to do. And one, of course, is very self-serving, which is to seek us out, because we do a great job. But not everyone, can afford to work with someone, an advisor. So if I were a do-it-yourselfer, I would certainly go on the FAFSA website, fafsa.gov. And they have tutorials. They have a FAFSA forecaster where you can calculate what's called an EFC, your expected family contribution. I'm not trying to. I hear myself now. FAFSA, EFC, all the acronyms. I'll stop there. But that's how the government thinks. So if you are the do-it-yourselfer and you can kind of wade through all that administrative bloat and double talk, you can get through this. It will just, the warning that I want to give you though is that it can appear straightforward, but if you're self-employed, if you're divorced, if you have any type of sort of special circumstance or all, then it's going to become more nuanced, and everything may not fit in the boxes. So even though I would start on that website, I would not stop there. I would think, you need to maybe go down the rabbit hole a little bit just to learn more about it. But if you want our help, I know you said you're gonna put this somewhere in the show notes.
I'll include a link in the show notes to what you're gonna bring up. Yeah.
Okay. So because we talked about this ahead of time, we have a financial aid forms consulting and preparation service, and we worked out a special deal for your podcast audience for 20% off. So they should go to financialaidtoolbox.com and use the coupon code toolbox, which will get them 20% off if you want our help. But if you don't, I would go to, there's plenty of free resources out there. I've even written a book about it. It's on Amazon, How to Pay Wholesale for College. There's other great books on it. Princeton Review wrote a pretty good book, but any of those things should help.
Nice. Thanks so much for sharing the insights and advice, Andy. I really appreciate it. And I understand that you have a podcast of your own as well, correct?
I think I do. It's not, it's no toolbox. Let's be honest. collegeplanningedge.com.
Awesome. Great. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Andy, really appreciate your coming on. Really appreciate your advice and the offer for my listeners as well. I will include that link in the show notes below this episode. And thanks again for joining, Andy.
Thank you.